Hello and welcome to the Practical Animal channel with me, John Beaumont. On the channel, when we do interviews with people, they are intended to provide you with insight of what it takes to be successful working with animals within the animal industry. And each week, we arrange interviews with professionals from different sectors of the animal industry. But today we speak to Naomi Johns, the Centre Director of the West of England Falconry. We're going to be asking Naomi what it takes to work successfully with birds of prey. So if you are a person who likes the idea of working with animals, fancies a career change, or is interested in becoming a volunteer with animals, or you are a further or higher education student, perhaps starting or completing your studies in animal management or one of the animal sciences, and considering your options for the future, this video is for you. Naomi Johns, welcome to the Practical Animal channel.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much indeed for coming. Naomi, first of all, please can you tell us about this fantastic bird on your fist?
I can indeed. So this is Casper, and Casper is our European kestrel. So this is a small species of falcon that we're very lucky to have in the UK. And unfortunately, they've been suffering a bit of a decline over the last 30 years or so. So Casper here does a lot of work under normal circumstances, out of COVID, lockdowns, of course, educating our visitors and getting people talking about British wildlife.
That's great. Naomi, you are Centre Director at West of England Falconry. For people wanting to work with animals, work in a bird of prey centre, perhaps even reach the dizzy heights that you've reached as a Centre Director, please can you describe your career trajectory?
Of course. So I first kind of found out about birds of prey and falconry when I was about 14, 15. And I watched a bird of prey demonstration and actually got to have a go flying a harrisawk. And I thought it was just the most thrilling, amazing thing to have this bird flying free and returning to my fist. So then I set about trying to find somewhere to volunteer, to learn the ropes. Being about 14, nobody was really interested in having me for work experience. And eventually I stumbled across a very kind gentleman who did just that. And he let me learn how to fly hawks. And he'd already set up West of England Falconry at this stage. And I worked for him after school, on the weekends, every spare moment that I could possibly find in my schedule. And once I finished school, I didn't do anything else. I just came straight to work with Jay and his birds. And we moved here 2017. And it was a lot of hard work to kind of build the centre up from what was just a handful of birds in Jay's back garden to something that is a centre now open to the public and fully licensed. So we worked very hard for a long time, and before I even got into a position where the company and the organisation could afford to pay me, I was working a lot of hours voluntary and lots of hours outside of work as well, learning everything that I possibly could, reading every book I could get my hands on. And eventually the position came, and I quite quickly became a trustee of the charity and now a director. And now I'm quite lucky that I get to run the centre every single day.
What sort of skills do people need, Naomi, to do what you do?
I think when it comes to any career with working with animals, it goes without saying that you need to work hard. But I think a lot of the time, at least certainly with handling birds of prey, what is forgotten is that is actually a great deal of skill in terms of the physical handling that we actually do. And there are hours and hours of learning to be done and studying to be done, reading up on the thousands of years that falconry has already been present in the UK and further afield, to actually learn these skills that I would expect, certainly of any of my staff, with any of our birds. But I think patience is certainly very important when you're working with birds of prey. Patience and being able to understand how they work, and patience to cooperate with that as well. Um, and I think also there is a sense of determination working with it, with any sort of animal, and making sure that actually everything, aside from the physical handling of the birds and flying and day-to-day routines, that the upkeep of the centre and the facility is kept the highest standard possible. That's certainly very important. And I think maybe more than anything else, certainly within my team, maybe the most important skill, aside from actually handling the birds, is communication with our visitors and with the public, because ultimately we're here to raise awareness for falconry and to protect wild birds of prey for many, many years to come. So education is the best thing we can possibly do to change the rapid declines we're seeing at the moment. So for us, being able to communicate and chat and get along with our visitors and get that message across is so crucial.
What about personal qualities, Naomi? And if someone thinks that they are a person who wants to work where they can create a bond with animals, but doesn't necessarily perceive themselves as, in inverted commas, being a people person, how can they
Right.
develop qualities?
Well, I think that's a good question, actually, because I mean, when I started, I was rubbish at talking to people. I was terrified at striking up a conversation with a stranger. And now, of course, I do it all the time and most often without thinking. And I think the best thing I could possibly say would just be to jump in and start practicing. And, you know, it's not like jumping in at the deep end. You're not going to be standing up in front of a crowd of people doing a flying demonstration on day one. It's just about greeting people, showing them around the centre, answering their questions. And quite quickly, if you've actually got a real passion for what you do and a real passion for birds of prey, then that will come across. And before you realise it, you'll start getting these communication skills and you will learn. You make mistakes, you learn, you get better. And with time, you become pretty good at it.
I always imagine that when somebody takes the plunge and opens a business or a charity, the very next day, the place is going to be hit by a national emergency. How have you managed with coronavirus?
Well, we're lucky that the West of England Falconry had been established for a few years before coronavirus turned up on the doorstep. But we'd only actually been operating as we are now on our current site for about 3 years when COVID hit. So we're still in the stage of building things up, and we didn't have much history to go on and budget and plan for something like a global pandemic either. And initially, of course, it was quite scary because no one knew what was going to happen. Nobody knew how it was going to play out. And it was things like permanent closure looming over our heads. But we sort of decided, myself and my colleague, you know, nearly 4 years ago now, we moved from our previous site with 2 months' notice, and everyone thought it was an impossible task, but we succeeded. And we thought, you know, if we can do that, we can do this. And we just got in the motion of setting everything in place that we had to do, cutting all the expenditure back to a minimum, and trying to convert some awareness to our online platforms and continuing to engage our visitors and followers as well through social media. And thankfully, we made it through the first lockdown, had a bit of a battle with the government to get hold of some appropriate funding. But once that came through, things were a little bit more stable, and our followers were incredibly supportive as well, I have to say. We were totally taken aback by people coming out and sponsoring birds or making donations just to help us out in a time of need. So that was really fantastic. But thankfully, we always prepared in advance. There was always sort of a golden pot, so to speak, for emergency funding for the birds in terms of veterinary care or this, that, and the other. So thankfully, that was never a concern for us. But it was great once things started coming back online in the middle of last year. We could get the staff back and start welcoming more visitors. And of course, things have changed again. We're back in lockdown, but this time around, we're in a much better position. We've done it before, so we'll get through it, no problem.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. What about bird flu, Naomi? How did that affect things?
Yeah, just as COVID wasn't enough last year, they had to throw one more spanner in the works, didn't they? So avian influenza, actually, it comes around every single winter. So it's not something that's totally alien to us. And in fact, it's a risk that we deal and contend with every single year. Of course, this winter it's come back with a little bit more vengeance, and there was actually a few outbreaks in the UK, hence why the restrictions came into force. But it comes with the migrating birds every year, which is why we see it in winter and why it trails away in the spring. And the estate that we fly our birds on has got a great big lake with lots of wildfowl on it. So that's a little bit more risky than other areas. So along with the fact that COVID-19 was affecting much of the operation of the business, our vet advised us that it was actually best to not take the risk for now, which we completely agreed with. So our flying birds haven't been outside now, unfortunately, for about a month. But we're hoping to be able to get them back online, flying free outdoors as they should very soon. But at the moment, it's the best thing for them to keep them safe.
Thank you. What role, Naomi, can falconry techniques play in the rehabilitation of injured birds of prey?
Oh, a huge amount. And falconry, as you know, is the art of hunting wild quarry with trained birds of prey. And falconry, in my personal opinion, are the only people who are appropriately qualified to treat wild birds of prey and rehabilitate wild birds of prey are falconers. So in falconry terms, I will train the bird up as my falconry hawk, and until I can see that it's actually hunting for itself, they'll be relying on me. And then once the time comes and I can see that they're hunting and that's successful in the wild, then eventually I'll give them more and more freedom back in their wild territory, a process we call hacking back. And then when they're ready, eventually they no longer need me at all. Their wild instincts return and they'll stay well away from me and my job is done. So last year, well, just before Christmas, I finished off a young kestrel who came in with absolutely no muscle at all, couldn't get off the ground for 3 days, was in critical care for a long time, a little juvenile male, and took me about 2 months and he was back where he should be. And I had the privilege of watching him flying over the hills and hunting, stooping into the grass, doing what kestrels do best. So that was rather lovely. But without falconry, he never would have made it back to the wild. So falconry, as it was and as it is certainly really important for the future of rehabilitation and for conservation.
That's a terrific insight. Thank you very much, Naomi. Naomi, what's your opinion on the current situation with the bird of prey centre sector? What's your perception of it nowadays? Because we have a lot of scores of centres up and down the country, UK wide. And what do you think? How do you think the bird of prey centre sector will go in the future?
That's a really interesting question. So if you look back, I'm a big lover of looking back through the history of falconry and I collect a lot of books. I mean, the very first centre that really came on the horizon was the International Centre for Birds of Prey. Back in the 70s, it was just called the Falconry Centre because it was the only one. And of course, as you say, nowadays there are an awful lot more. And I think the really unique, very good and very purposeful bird of prey centres are quite far and few between. Unfortunately, there's a lot that aren't up to standard and that have had backlashes from some people for being poor standards. And that's something which every single good falconer will frown upon in a big way. But I think that ultimately these places will fizzle out over time and the best quality of bird of prey centres will remain. But the other thing worth discussing as well, the reason there are more bird of prey centres these days is because people have always had a connection and an interest in falconry for as you can go back to the 1st century in the UK. And in modern times, we have the ability to kind of create a platform where people can come and learn about birds of prey and learn about the way that birds of prey work and cooperate with humans, whether that be falconry hunting with birds of prey or free flying for awareness and conservation. And there's nothing like watching a bird fly free in the air to educate and inspire people. Some people won't respond to watching documentaries or reading books. So it is a totally unique sector, in my opinion, for actually giving people an insight into why we need to conserve birds of prey and protect wildlife as a whole. So I think bird of prey centres find a really, really important role and will have this really important role for the future. But of course, there is always the aspect of ironing out some of the husbandry or the centres that aren't up to standard. But like I say, I personally think so long as we keep doing what is right and we keep talking about what is right, educating about what is right, and that will pass with time.
Do you take on volunteers?
We do, yeah. So at the moment with COVID-19, our training is kind of restricted. So we're not taking on many new volunteers at the moment until we know the situation is changing. But training people about birds of prey and the husbandry of birds of prey is really, really important to me. And I think, I was lucky enough to be given a chance as a young person to get to learn how to fly hawks. And a lot of what I know now, I've self-taught and I've learned from books and I've worked very hard to learn. But I have knowledge now that I think is really important to share and to spread. And I think if you've got enthusiasm for working with birds of prey, then there's always going to be a place for you here. Obviously, our volunteers get involved with the flying and handling of the birds, and anything from gardening to cleaning aviaries to leading experiences with the public. So I've always found that every volunteer is different. Every volunteer will find their niche, and it's part of our job to help you find that. But the key, most important thing for us is that you have a passion for working with birds of prey, and we'll give you every opportunity to develop your skills, to learn more, and to get some experience handling some of these lovely birds. So I also run usually 2 big training days a year, and we have all of our staff down together and we do all sorts of things from practical first aid through to equipment making. That's something that I really am very passionate about, is making all of our own equipment for the birds from scratch, and to building aviaries, to conservation strategies across the world, all sorts of different things. So training and educating our team is really important to me. And as long as we're paid back with enthusiasm and hard work, then I'll teach you as much as you want to know.
Naomi Johns, Centre Director at West of England Falconry, thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a wonderful time.